Welcome to this day 2 of the seminar program of Nuart, called Nuart Plus. So my name is Eirik Knudsen, and I am the person who, at least on paper, is in charge of Nuart Plus. So yesterday we discussed utopia and rights to the city, and we had this subtitle of the entire day called Create. But as those of you who attended last night or yesterday saw, most of the discussions, or much of the discussion, was related around actually destroy, and how we should, the idea of utopia actually comes from a need or a dissatisfaction with what we have today, which basically means that the destruction is a way forward. The subtitle of today's seminar is actually Destroy. So what we're going to do today is to basically play around in the heritage of the Dada movement, and we're going to look at how street art can basically destroy the boundaries between art and everyday life. So we have an exciting program, at least I think so. We're going to start off with a presentation by Carlo McCormick before we go into a artist presentation / debate led by Evan Pricko, before Christian Omodeo is going to give a talk about conservation of art. And finally, we're going to have a small panel debate in the end, but that one is not included in the program, but that's going to last for half an hour or so, so we will wrap it up at 15:30. So with that, I would like to introduce the first speaker. So this is Carlo McCormick up here on stage. He is a writer, curator, art critic, and also a senior editor of Paper magazine. And the title of his talk today is The Art of Negation, Defacement, Destruction, and Erasure as an Act of Creation. So, please, Carlo.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a sketch. It's not a completed idea. It's more like the way Martin and James and Eric do these things. They kind of generate ideas, and then I try to riff off of them. Let's start, since this is the day for Dada, to invoke their words from 100 years ago this year, from the first Dada manifesto. We are circus ringmasters, and we can be found whistling among the winds of fairgrounds, in convents, prostitutions, theaters, realities, feelings, restaurants, oh ho ho, bang bang. They were responding to a world at such a miserable point, halfway through the First World War, an insane trauma, and they were discussing at that point Dada as a kind of nullification of meaning. We are Dada because we mean nothing. So we're going to look at that primal response to the absurdity of life as an act of destruction. And I start on the eve of Dada, 1 year before to be precise, with something which is very much not that, but of that moment. This is one of the landmarks of modernism. It's Kazimir Malevich's Black Square from 1915. So radical, so different, that in the great modernist thing, he had to name a whole movement after it, suprematism. And we have always looked at it as a kind of mystical work, as the embodiment of Kant's ideas of the sublime. But perhaps it's actually a companion piece to Duchamp's Ready-Made. That is, it's finding a location for art, the frame. The frame around the Black Square makes it an aesthetic thing the same way that our mutt turns a urinal into a fountain. But there's another problem with it. Is this how I do it? Oh, good. It's also, in fact, based on a very popular print of the day from 1897, which Alphonse Allais, Negros fighting in a cellar at night. It's a racist, horrible thing that, in fact, he references directly. So we may also look at it as an appropriation. But this is also, what is it about? It's about the loss of meaning. It's about that moment where things don't happen. So now we're going to just look at, perhaps, some of the ways in which these things get destroyed. I thought we could start a little bit with erasure, because that is kind of something fundamental to street artists and graffiti artists alike, is the buff. And this is Mobster, who's kind of made work, I'm dealing with some of the artists who've made work about the buff, about the act of erasure. So this is called Acceptable Shade of Gray from last year, I think it was. So what, you know, it's this thing of like these erasures, they often look worse than the graffiti they're covering over, these splotches of mismatched paint. So you know, what is that acceptable shade of gray there? And these are just a couple from a, it was great because it was such an ongoing thing. I'm sure most of you know more about this. It was like this pressure wash piece, red. But it was this wall where he just traced over, over time how whoever it was who was covering up had this other red. And so this kind of thing blew, and then at the end he did this. And at a certain point he'd write the word red there just to get them to paint that part. So it was a kind of a conversation I think he was having with his guy erasing it. What do we got here? Okay, so this is like a before. It's going to be one of those before-afters. Espo in, I don't know what year it was. Nike had this kind of, you know, sleazy way that corporations engage in youth culture. They had something called the Blue Room in Venice. It was a really, like a fancy party house, and they invite artists to stay there and try to do something for the Blue Room. So what Espo did was he took the residents and then he did something in the city. And what he did is he worked with, the city has this thing that, so you could get the before after. I don't do it, can I know how to? Yeah, right? So that's what it looks like, and that's what he did with it. Any knucklehead who just doesn't like these damn kids ruining the buildings can go and get paint from the city for free and sometimes even get some money for it and paint over the graffiti. It's like a citizens brigade. So that's what he did. He went over like really bad graffiti in ways that obviously put up his name. I do it like this. So we all know this spot now because Finian's working there. And actually, if you look, we can look at the next one, right? That's a kind of close-up at the base there. That's still incorporated into the piece he's doing there right now, but that's a buff piece, right? So this is Dolk, who's from Norway. And so he was doing all these buff pieces, and I decided to show that one because it's local, but it's all, you know, what's the point of erasure unless you can't commodify it? So he does prints of it. And I particularly like this one because, to me, that's one of the great disappearing acts. It's better than the Duchampian silence when he left the art world, is when in 1908 or so, 1909, this Italian guy who was working in the Louvre decided to steal the Mona Lisa, Vincent Perugio. And the Mona Lisa was already a classic, but it wasn't like the kind of cliche, the kind of thing that, you know, songs are written about and ships are launched and sunk by. The Mona Lisa was just considered a great work of art. And it becomes a pop culture icon when the painting is stolen. And literally people line up down the block. It's like one of the first big blockbuster moments. People line up outside the Louvre to wait in line, to go stand before the empty wall where the Mona Lisa hung. It was a huge pop culture moment, front page of the news. So I always like that bit of disappearance. So this is this guy DS. Does anyone know anything about him? I just like this thing. So that's a piece of his, and that's the guy removing it, and then, well, I guess it's got the before and after right there. So one year here they showed this ridiculous movie of vandalism or something like that. It was all these people who were as obsessed with removing the vandal, and they're totally marginal street people, and just so angry. But in fact, they kind of know more about graffiti than people who are like me are supposed to know more about it. Same way with the anti-vandal squad. So I like that. This is self-explanatory in some ways. The Banksy piece about this is actually based off of true story, right? Do you know what cave it was, Christian? Somewhere in France. A local mayor had people remove graffiti from inside a cave. Turns out he was cave painting. So, and that's what this piece is based off of. And then one of the great acts of erasure. This is Blue removing one of his murals of the many he removed in Bologna in response to a show that Christian was associated with, and he will address that later this afternoon. I'm sure we're all going to want to hear about that. But beyond the politics of it, it is such a radical gesture. It is such a strong statement from an artist to do these things. I like this one. So that, I don't know, I probably kind of ruined a nice image by putting the before thing in. But this was, it was called the Lenin Wall. And it always existed as a kind of like little break in the hegemony in Prague. And it was a place of limited, like the way they have these kind of free walls in cities, it was a free wall for people to kind of put up their thoughts and their ideas and stuff like that. So it exists through the Czech Republic and then on into the thing. And so this group called Prague Service painted it over and did Wall is over, which is such a great, funny thing to do for the Lenin Wall. And it was amazing how much, as an act of graffiti removal, it really pissed people off. They thought that was the worst act of vandalism ever done, this buff. So it's, to me, like really poetic in its things. I just like this image. I'm kind of reaching to stick it in here, but I've been working with Frop Jankoshak on something, and he's such a nut. I just kind of like, oh, let me put him in. So now let's, this is the act of erasure by which all erasures are measured. So this is, I'm a bad historian, so I gotta look up the year, 1953. So Bob Rauschenberg goes to the great artist of his day, de Kooning, and with his permission gets a drawing and erases it. So this is a erased de Kooning drawing. And I'm just not smart enough to talk about it really. I thought I'd quote Leo Steinberg, who's really one of the great art critics and historians of all time. This is what he's writing shortly thereafter. His erasure opened the portals of art to all wannabe artists with no talent for drawing. The open door situation would have arrived anyway, what with digital animation, video installation, etc. But Rauschenberg anticipated and legitimized the process from within art. As it, I can't read my, I suddenly understood that the fruits of an artist's work need not be an object, it could be an action, something once done, but so unforgettably done that it's never done with. A satellite orbiting your consciousness, like the perfect crime or a beau geste. And in a way, I think that we can look at all these acts of erasure as orbiting around this primary act of erasure, of taking, at that time, what is amongst the artist community considered your greatest living artist and erasing him. And then Mike Bitlow is a kind of famous postmodernist artist, and he did a whole body of work where he painstakingly recreated about, I think, 20 drawings of de Kooning and then erased them. There was like from 19, whatever, he took a whole chunk of his work and then he made this beautiful thing, which is now known as kind of Bitlow's ashes, but it's literally the bits of paper that come up and the bits of eraser that come up from all the erasures he did. And then I love this. This is something I've only just discovered recently, but it's quite old. It's from 1920, and it's a collaboration between Man Ray and Marcel Duchamp, and it's called Dust Breeding. But Marcel was a notoriously messy man, or unclean in that way. And so this is Man Ray did a whole series of photographic works of the dust in Duchamp's apartment studio. Now, Fluxus is really all about this, and I could have probably just done a whole talk just using Fluxus artists and shown Namjoon Paik's beautiful 20-hour Zen for film, which is this clear leader which accumulates things and stuff like that. But if I'm going to do one, I'm going to just do my favorite, and that's Yoko Ono. And so on the left you have Half a Room from 1967, and on the right you have her famous cut piece from 1964 at Carnegie Hall, where people literally came up and were asked to cut the dress, and you can see why Marina Abramovic's been stealing her ideas ever since. But you know, Yoko would be also like, take a bite out of an apple, put it on this pedestal. So it's really art built into ephemerality. And so I'm obviously not doing a lot of street art, but I'm trying to talk about these issues through this other kind of arc of art. This one, I think it's got the thing there. So yeah, this is just the ultimate fetish object for people who love the cut-ups that Burroughs learned from Brian Geisen. This technique, which is kind of, again, another abnegation of meaning, but a way of cutting up text and reassembling it, and almost like the surrealist notion of automatic writing, but this is with previous used work. So this is not really a work of his, it's more like just this weird thing that happens when someone dies. You go like, and it ends up in the crazy hands of archivists. This is a beautiful cut piece by an artist not so known for this, but he did a lot of great urban work. He's kind of thought of as just like one of the kind of founding fathers of minimalism. But this is Sol LeWitt, and the piece is called Part of Manhattan with Central Park, Lincoln Center, and Rockefeller Center removed. And that's from 78. The guy who was really rocking this stuff at that time was Gordon Maddox Clark. This is probably his most signature thing because it's one of the first. It's called Splitting. But he's working as an architect, but he's very much addressing the fact that he's living in New York and he's seeing the city in incredible decay. So he was doing these splitting pieces where literally he broke a house in half. And this is a beautiful one he did in New York, which I actually realized this is Gansevoort Street in the west. It was a pier right at the end of Gansevoort Street on the west side there, which is actually where the Whitney is now. It just occurred to me that's actually there, you know. So, but it's called Day's End, and really what you see is this is the way he wanted you to see it, was just that light. See that beautiful, you know, almost like a post-minimalist object in light there on the wall, but that's a hole he cut in the ceiling. So it's always about the light there at Day's End. Then, just because I wanted to and I'm self-indulgent, I kind of thought that if we're going to deal with erasure and invisibility and things like that, we might talk a little bit about camouflage. And this is Hugh the Hunter by Hugh Hayton. It's a beautiful movie. He did a still from it. And then, just because we like to follow tangents to where they don't go, I thought of the Ghost Army. The Ghost Army was this crazy thing that we did during, the United States did. I don't think the Allies were part of it. During World War II, we employed a number of artists to create kind of fake impressions of army. They would do these sound installations where it sounded like troops were marching and everyone's radio was going off at the same time. They did all these kind of, misdirections to fool the Germans at that time. So this is an inflatable tank, which they would put somewhere to be so that aerial surveillance would see that stuff. And here's an inflatable going up. And then, so I gotta get this right. That's Ellsworth Kelly on the left, who was one of the artists employed by that. And if you think about that, that brings Ellsworth Kelly to Europe, and then he takes a big chunk of what's going on in modernism then and brings it back to the States. And so that's really fundamental for if you care about American art. And then Bill Blass, the famous fashion designer, someone did a caricature of one of the guys in the group, so I just like that one. Then I love this one. If I'm going to go camouflage as an act of abnegation instead of an act of disguise or mimesis, is how nature works. I love Verushka. She was, you have to be as old as me to love her, but she was one of the first, maybe the very first, world-famous supermodel. And she ended up living underneath a bridge near me, so that's how she kind of reappears, but Vera Lindorf was her real name. And I think that we can say that the fashion industry is perhaps not the healthiest food for for models or women in general. And she, at the end of it, kind of was losing her mind, and she did this beautiful body of work, which is quite unknown today, but with this guy, Holger Troeltsch, where she basically like erased her body. Aren't they fucking gorgeous? And then it's actually going on, it's been picked up again, this idea with this guy, Louie Bolin. I don't know if anyone has ever dealt with him. He seems like he could be part of our culture, but I don't think he is. Maybe because it fits in with a lot of the trompe-l'oeil stuff, the kitsch that the Chinese love to do with street art and stuff. But he did this series, Man in the City. So these are, let's see, what was the first one? That was, well, I got the titles. Doesn't matter. Hiding in the City is what they were. 9 Dragons. That's family photo. And the one, I don't know what the one, it's the number 65. They often just had numbers. Okay, let's get off of that or follow it in another direction. We can talk about erasure also as like an act of destruction, an act of defacement, all these different ways. And this is body work that didn't really do so well for Andy, but these were his oxidation paintings. And his oxidation paintings were otherwise known as piss paintings. He would piss on a sensitive material where it would, you know, kind of ruin the copper. And so this was in 12 parts, but that's what it is. Those are, if you fetishize Andy, you get to see the trail of his pee. So then a lot of people just had to attack, you know, we've always, certainly we were at that painting is dead moment, da-da-da-da. People like attacked canvases in various ways. This is Yves Klein making one of his paintings with a blowtorch. This is, who is this? This is Gustav Metzger. This is autodestructive art. This is at South Bank in London way back in like 1961 before they even had the South Bank Art Center, right? I think that's pre-that, right? Certainly pre-Tate Modern. So yeah, he's working with acid, making a painting with acid on vinyl, just eating it away. I have no idea who this cat is, but I just couldn't resist. His name is Lucas Gemian, but he was doing laundered paintings. And this is more a performance of it, but this is this guy Oliver Jeffries who does dipped paintings. Here's a funny Brit. I like this guy Paul Stevenson. He was going and getting, like, this is you know, these paintings, 19th century paintings, they have a market. They're not cheap, but they're, I guess if you've got money and want to work that way as an artist, you can get these things. And doing erasures. So this is the horse, right? He removed the horse. This is Lady in the Mirror. The horse was from 1830, the original thing. So it brings up this idea Heidegger had of suratur, which means under erasure. And the idea with that is sort of, you write a word and then you cross it out or you erase it in just such a way that you're taking it away, but you're leaving enough of a trace that people could kind of half discern the meaning in there, right? So it's a form of emphasis because you're putting suratur is under erasure, but in a way that you're going to look at it, and so it's like a way of, you know. Okay, so what have I got here? I've got, this is Paul Stevenson, did do these things with street art as well, so that's a cause on the left, and Stinkfish, I think, on the right. And so that's where he just erased, he did the erasure there. And then another way to talk about the suratur, as I said, is this idea of the erasure, of the suratur. So Jean-Michel was masterful at that and totally influential that way. It's like Mark Gonzalez and all these artists now, not only does everyone draw like, you know, the way that Leo Steinberg was talking about the undue influence of the erased de Kooning. It's sort of like Jean-Michel's had such an undue influence. You can see every kid's like leaving their mistakes in, right? Which is it's a wonderful form of address. I love this piece. This is CPRKR, Charlie Parker, right? So that's his tribute to Charlie Parker, and it's kind of so great because it has a little bit of the funereal shroud kind of thing going there. And then, you know, what's on the other, what does he hid underneath behind on the other side of the crowns there? And then the Stanhope Hotel, well, yes, that is where Charlie Parker died, for sure. He was watching big band, like the woman who was known as the Princess of Bop. She was a big supporter of that stuff. Yeah, but the date's wrong, right? So, and then he corrects it from 1953 to 1955, and I think maybe 55 is right, but certainly not April. You know, so it's sort of like he's correcting, but he's still getting it wrong. But, well, you know, he was doing this stuff before we had the internet, so I can check the dates and go, that's not when Charlie died. Anyway, so the erasure in his case, I would just want to point out, is it's a trope. It's not like he's even trying to get it right. He's trying to leave evidence of how we work these things out and how histories are passed off. Then I thought I'd talk a little bit about defacement and start it with a nice image. I just love the title of this piece. One Day You Will No Longer Be Loved. It's Jake and Dinos Chapman. And it's just like the other ones, it's an alteration of a previous existing thing. And then, of course, we have the classic, right? So you don't need me to talk about this beautiful defacement, I don't think. I think it's one of the great acts that Duchamp left us. But defacement goes back a long way. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Tausig, the sociologist, did some really radical work on it, looking at like how it worked in ritualistic forms in Africa, like kind of the same way cannibalism would. But if you went and destroyed a village's mask, like what that represented and how that signified and things like that. So one of the great defacements, and this is just one of those nasty 19th century paintings, I think. Let's see if I can find it. Bonaparte Before the Sphinx, Jean-Léon Gérôme, 1867. So Napoleon, when he marched his troops through Egypt, and goodness knows, it's a good thing imperialists never went through the Middle East, because then we wouldn't be able to blame their problems on them. He had his troops shoot the nose off the Sphinx, which is, you know, if that doesn't explain defacement, I don't know what does. I love these. I don't know if people are familiar with this. This was this insane defaced book jacket kind of project that Kenneth Halliwell and Joe Orton did together. And from 59 to 62, they were going into libraries, taking the books and defacing them, and then putting them back. And I think Halliwell was the collage artist, and Orton was the poet, right? Very famous writer, poet. And he was changing the book jacket text, you know, when you open a book and it says what it's about, who the author is. He was defacing those as well. And they actually got arrested for this, and they went to jail. And then they got out, and it got very complicated because Halliwell was considerably more famous than Joe Orton. And then Joe Orton became like this super famous playwright. And they were gay lovers. And you know, artists don't always get along well, and it's even harder when one of them gets more famous than another. And so then Halliwell killed Joe Orton and then killed himself. So at a time really where you didn't really talk about the fact that sodomy was, you know, it's still illegal in England, right, in the early 60s. So it's a wild story, but it's a great body of defacements. And then continuing on, we've got Günter Bruss, and I could probably do a whole bunch of Viennese actionists and stuff like that. So that's his self-portrait, and then on the right, it's like a kind of a series he did of self-painting, but acts of ritual defacement. And I don't know this girl, but I just like this piece, Gillian MacDonald. So she was doing kind of horror makeup, like, and then riding subways and shit like that, and but kind of doing it to create fake movie stills. So it's got a performative aspect, but then for her, I think the art is then like the fact that it's meant to look like a movie still. And then I got to put my buddy in there because this is one of the great vandalisms, but Tony went and, Tony Jeffries, can you read the date on there? Is it 74? I can't see from, he went and defaced the Guernica, you know, one of the great anti-war paintings of all time. He did it with a special paint that would not stick on and but like could be, you know, damp toweled off, like wouldn't even be a big restoration job. So it was not quite as nihilistic as he thought, and then he got so nervous or so excited by the situation. I don't know if there's street artists in here who could talk about the first time they went and put their tag up and how badly they fucked it up. I remember Herring had a really funny one about like this bridge he did as a kid out in Pennsylvania, and it made no sense. So I think he wrote Lies Kill All, but he was trying to be a little more articulate about it, but it was about the lie of MoMA having it and the Vietnam War and all the wars and atrocities, and like, because the whole point of the Guernica being in the United States as another political act was Picasso saying it couldn't go to his home country, it couldn't be in Spain until Franco was gone and their atrocities were done for. And do we have that Argentinian artist here? I need help with translating this. This is really great. This is, do I still have it here? Yeah. They're called Mujeres Públicas, Cajita de Fósforos. So what is that? House of Matches?
No, box of matches.
Box of matches? Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, good. Is this regular? Okay. And then, can you translate what it actually says on there? Right. The only church that illuminates. So this was done for a show at the Reina Sofia, I believe, in Madrid, and it got famous because, of course, it got censored. That one of the things that happens with art sometimes. It does very well by people hating it. But so this is they're a feminist lesbian collective in Argentina. I don't know much, but it's certainly implied in there. I love this piece of Chris Burden's. We could talk a lot about Chris and acts of destruction, stuff including crucifying himself on the top of a car or having himself shot in the shoulder. But I like this one. It's a lesser known one from the mid-'80s. And it's called Samson, you know, which is that kind of figure of great strength in the Bible, I think. So it's a turnstile and then a winch. And this is the kind of winch you'd use to jack up a house. This thing is like real strength winch. And the idea was as more people would come into the gallery, that winch would keep pressing out and eventually would bring down the building. He obviously had it calibrated that no matter how many people came during the show, it wasn't going to do it. But if that had been a permanent installation, it would have been an act of destruction. And I think I'm almost done. Henny Penny, and actually, so who is Henny Penny? Do you know? That's the character of Chicken Little with the sky's falling. And so I always like, who's this Henny Penny guy? And then I found out recently it's this guy Rafael Montaros who started El Bohio Museum, which is one of the great Latino arts. It's not about art from it's kind of about the diaspora in America. Like he was a Puerto Rican artist, and he did a lot of these destructions. And this was his piano destruction concert from 1967. And then we should kind of at least end our bit of destruction on one of the greatest acts of destruction. This is Jean Tinguely's Homage on New York. It's the beginning. It's not the beginning, but it's kind of the high moment of happenings. It was this huge sculpture he built in the backyard of the Museum of Modern Art, and in the end, shut down the museum. The fire trucks were called in. He built this massive machine that took up all this space and basically was there just to go down in a blaze of glory, like proto-survival research laboratories. And then I thought, since we started with Malevich's embrace of the sublime being not like we sometimes go, oh, that meal was sublime or something. The sublime really in aesthetics is sort of like this notion of a beauty so terrifying, like the face of God, like Joseph Mallord William Turner tying himself to the mast of a ship and sailing into a storm. It's that notion of the sublime, right? It's the discussion of the sublime that Richard Serra was too fucking stupid to understand when he got mad at the composer Stockhausen for saying that the bringing down the World Trade Centers was an act of the sublime. So it's this sublime, I mean, and less so we can just do it like that. This is the leap into the void of Yves Klein, which was faked, right? Wonderfully so. Is that good? Did I use up all my time? Do we have time for questions?
So you actually finished up a bit early this time,
Yeah.
which is very nice for a change, sorry. So we have time for some questions and comments from the audience, if you have any.
Yeah, it would be a hard one to comment on, but... Or we can just
Yeah,
talk outside.
David.
I'm not sure it's really a question from home. I mean, I had wonderful images to show. And one of the things that came to my mind on the Guernica reference was the moment at the UN Security Council during the Iraq War, or I think just before it, when nervousness by the officials about the impact that would have as a backdrop for Colin Powell's discussion about the preparation was covering it over with the blue.
Right, and it wasn't even actually the actual Guernica. It was like a tapestry version of it or something. Yeah, yeah, that was a great. That was a kind of erasure as well. Brilliant.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering about, in the face of that kind of war, what sort of appropriate responses there are when the officials are kind of covering over an image like that. It was just a kind of comment, really, but whether that sparked any thoughts.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I feel so sorry for Colin Powell because I don't think he was a bad man. He was just had a really shitty job and like a good military man, he fell on the sword for a bunch of liars from Halliburton. But no, I think that was totally inappropriate that they covered that up, and I think they were kind of mortified in the end, the UN, weren't they? Or at least the American part of it? What's the appropriate response?
Well, it was just to see whether that, because you were thinking there of the erasures
Right.
by the artist, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking about
Right.
when the work seems still so powerful that it becomes erased by
Yeah.
the artist.
I hope that's a rhetorical question because I don't have an answer. It's a good one.
Other questions or comments?
Good. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you all. And then we start again at 1 o'clock.